Last Friday, Apple filed a 41-page lawsuit against OpenAI in a California federal court, and buried in the legal language is a story that reads less like corporate litigation and more like the messiest office breakup Silicon Valley has produced in years. 2 years ago, these two companies stood on a stage together at WWDC and put ChatGPT inside the iPhone. Last Friday, Apple described OpenAI's hardware business, and this is a fairly direct paraphrase of the complaint, as compromised from the inside out. You are watching the Tech Tales. Take a second, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Here's the setup. OpenAI wants to build hardware, actual physical hardware, something that isn't a phone, isn't a laptop, and isn't just ChatGPT wearing a trench coat and pretending to be a gadget. So OpenAI bought a stealth hardware startup called I.O. from Jony, the man who spent 30 years designing Apple's most iconic products, for $6.5 billion. Apple spent decades building the most valuable design language in consumer electronics. OpenAI just wrote a check for the guy who designed it. Running that effort is Tang Tan, a 24-year Apple veteran who used to lead product design for the iPhone and the Apple Watch. Which means OpenAI didn't just buy a hardware company. It hired the guy who used to build Apple's hardware and asked him to go build something to replace it. Apple's lawsuit claims Tan didn't stop there. Over 400 former Apple employees now work at OpenAI, and Apple alleges a subset of them were used as something closer to a pipeline. Here's where the complaint gets almost uncomfortably specific. According to the filing, Tan directed Apple employees interviewing at OpenAI to bring real components, batteries, logic boards, internal parts still under wraps, into what the lawsuit calls a show-and-tell session. One candidate, apparently the only person in this entire story with any self-preservation instinct, reportedly seemed surprised by the request, unsure he was even allowed to take Apple hardware out of the building. Why would anyone assume a job interview is the appropriate venue for smuggled parts? And there's a document. Apple alleges Tan circulated an internal offboarding guide, one originally written to walk departing employees through Apple's own exit security checks, and used it instead as a cheat sheet, teaching new OpenAI hires exactly how to slip past those checks on their way out. Here's the part almost nobody explains properly, and it's the actual engine of this entire story. Revoking someone's access to a company isn't one switch. It's dozens of separate systems, cloud storage, source repositories, internal messaging, device management, vendor portals, that all have to individually and correctly agree, at the same time, that a door is now closed. Miss one system in that chain, and the door doesn't slam. It just stays open quietly, waiting for someone to notice it's still unlocked. Someone noticed. His name is Chang Liu, an 8-year Apple electrical engineer who left for OpenAI in January. According to the complaint, Liu exploited a previously unknown authentication bug to reach Apple's internal network storage through a colleague's still active Apple laptop, weeks after his own access should have expired. He then texted that colleague, "I found out I can access the network storage, so funny." This is the moment the whole case actually turns on. Not a hack in the cinematic sense, not a break-in. A door nobody remembered to close, found by someone who used to have the key and never gave it back. If this is making sense so far, the like button helps more than you'd think. Moving on. It gets better or worse, depending on your appetite for second-hand embarrassment. Apple alleges Liu also failed to return a second company laptop when he left, and separately texted that he still had another Apple computer he planned to keep using. Apple found that message on a coworker's device, which means the evidence in a corporate espionage lawsuit was, allegedly, sitting unencrypted in someone's group chat the entire time. Whoever runs security at OpenAI did not have a good week. Apple's own complaint doesn't exactly undersell any of this either. At one point, summarizing what it claims to have found so far, Apple states plainly that this is only the tip of the iceberg. This isn't a fringe problem unique to $2 trillion companies having a very public falling out. Research from the security firm Wing Security found that at a large share of businesses, more than 4 in 10 former employees can still reach the company's code repositories long after their last day. The Verizon 2026 Data Breach Investigations Report lists credential abuse as a factor in roughly 1 out of every 8 breaches it tracked, concentrated heavily around access that was supposedly revoked and quietly wasn't. And the Ponemon Institute's most recent Cost of Insider Risks report puts the average price of incidents like this at somewhere north of $17 million a year per organization. None of this is rare. It's just rarely this visible because it's rarely a company worth $4.6 trillion sitting on one side of it. Here's the twist, and it's the part that actually reframes everything you just heard. Apple built the most secretive corporate culture in tech. Internal code names for every unreleased product, compartmentalized teams that don't even know what other teams are building, specifically to protect itself from exactly this kind of leak. But according to the lawsuit's own allegations, Tan used those same internal code names while recruiting, so candidates would immediately understand which secret project he was really asking about. The secrecy wasn't the defense. It became the map. And here's the detail almost nobody is connecting, the one that makes this whole thing funnier and sadder at the same time. 2 years ago, Tim Cook and Sam Altman, a man roughly half the internet now refers to, semi-affectionately, as Scam Altman, allegedly, stood on a stage together and announced that ChatGPT was moving into the iPhone. That was the wedding. This past January, without a press conference, without a statement, without so much as a group text, Apple quietly signed a new multi-year deal to power the next generation of Siri using Google's Gemini instead. OpenAI's name did not appear anywhere in that announcement. No public breakup, no closure. The partnership didn't end so much as it just stopped being mentioned. The way you stop mentioning an ex once their replacement is already standing in the room. Check your own accounts right now, actually. That old job you left a year or two ago. The GitHub repository you were added to for one project and never removed from. There's a real chance your own door was never properly closed either. Not because anyone is coming for it, but because closing doors correctly is tedious work. And tedious work gets skipped long before anyone notices it was skipped. Watch this line, because it's the one the entire video has been building toward. Apple's complaint spends dozens of pages describing recruitment, coordination, and deception. But every single allegation in it depends on the same unglamorous failure underneath. A permission that should have expired the moment someone walked out the door, and simply didn't. Silicon Valley loves to talk about security in the language of firewalls, encryption, and zero-day exploits. What actually cracked the wall here, according to Apple's own filing, was administrative. Nobody needed to be a genius. They just needed a company that forgot to ask for its key back. The uncomfortable truth this case reveals isn't really about espionage at all. It's that the biggest vulnerability inside any company was never the people trying to get in. It's the people who already have a key, sitting quietly in a system nobody thought to check, waiting for someone to remember it's still there. If you made it this far, you're a champ. Subscribe and see you in the next one.